Today we have a large audience. Thank you very much for coming. It's about time, so we'd like to announce the opening of the Art to Live International Symposium. I serve as a master of ceremony MC today. My name is Ms. Tazaki of Art to Live coordinator. Thank you very much. And at the outset of the symposium, on behalf of organizers, Ms. Miyamoto will have a greeting. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I am Ms. Miyamoto and in charge of Art to Live Secretariat Office, representing the Association for the Promotion of Contemporary Art in Japan and Capacious. Thank you very much for coming to the Art to Live International Symposium and the preliminary event for the Osaka Kansai Expo hosted by Osaka Prefecture. The aim of today's symposium is to consider the art of people with disabilities, which is becoming increasingly recognized in Japan from the perspective of contemporary art. And thanks to the warm cooperation of Ms. Yukiko Koide, a pioneer in this field in Japan, we are able to invite Mr. Tom DiMaria, who is active at the forefront of the world, as a special guest. For the second session, we are also able to welcome guests who are active at the forefront of the art world while carefully covering the peripheral activities of contemporary art. On this upcoming occasion of the International Festival, the World Expo, I hope you enjoyed the symposium until the end, sharing a forum for discussion open to the future with you gathered here today. Thank you very much, Ms. Miyamoto. Now we'd like to start the first session, the 50-year journey of creative growth from the body shop to the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And the speakers is the Mr. Tom DiMaria, the Director Emeritus of the Creative Growth Arts Center, and Ms. Yukiko Koide, the curator. Please give them a big hand. Thank you. To welcome them. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you very much for this invitation. I'll give you a moment to adjust your headsets for the translators. And hopefully, I'm sorry I don't speak Japanese, so hopefully the translator will keep up with my pace. We have a lot to talk about, so I want to get started. But it's really a pleasure to be here, and looking at this many people, it's really important to see how many people are interested in this subject. That's how we're going to move forward. So, I will begin. This is an image from the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art taken last month. And it's two artists from Creative Growth, Judith Scott on the left and Dan Miller on the right. So how have we arrived at a moment when artists with disabilities are presented in a contemporary art context in one of the top two museums of modern art in America? Well, this has come to be because of the work of many people and the artists themselves, and I want to look a little bit at how we've arrived at this moment. First of all, the artists. So what was it like to be a person with a disability in the last 100 years? This is a photograph of Joyce Scott on the left and her twin sister Judith on the right. Judith was born a few minutes after Joyce. They're twins but not identical. Judith was born with Down syndrome and was deaf. The girls grew up together in their family home until age 6, when, under the advice of the doctor, he said Judith needs to live in a hospital because she has Down syndrome. The mother said, well, they're twin sisters. They live together. What should I do? And he said, well, in the middle of the night, you take her out of the bed and you put her in the hospital, and in the morning, no one will remember. And of course, everyone remembered, and it created a family trauma. So what happens next? Judith spends 40 years in an institution. They don't know she's deaf, so they never give her any form of language. Her sister, now living in California, says, well, we don't do this anymore. Disability is different. And she goes back to the hospital and gets her sister out and says, maybe art is the path forward. And she's heard of a place called Creative Growth Art Center, and she said, I will bring her here. And we'll talk about creative growth in a moment. So Judith comes to Creative Growth, and she spends essentially 2 years sitting at a table, traumatized, sort of unable to move. She made a few drawings. But then one day she picked up some objects and fiber and started to make sculptures that led her to a 20-year nonstop career of sculpture making. I like to ask the question, what would you do if you had to tell me about your life and you had no language? This is Judith's second sculpture, and I think it's clear that she's trying to communicate to us her relationship with her sister and her life. So she has solved her problem of communication visually. Her work was, she gathers objects. We sort of, actually she steals things from the studio and she wrapped them, and she would conceal them in a way that responded to her life as a person in an institution where nothing is private or your own. So I think she tried to protect objects and find safety in her work. The pieces take various forms. Judith is no longer alive. She died in 2005. But we often see these forms like figurative, with this red spine down the bottom, the idea of safety or a cocooned figure, I think in response to her life of institutionalization and her freedom after that. So how does her work come to be seen as art? And how does it get to be presented in the art world? This is Tokyo 2000. Her first significant exhibition of her art was in Japan. In the year 2000, this is the Shiseido Gallery in the Ginza, curated by my colleague here, Yukiko Koide, who we will hear from in a few minutes. So the first people that understood Judith's work were not necessarily art museum people or curators. It was people from the fashion world or people from other segments of life that had an interest in visual culture, in what is new, in human expression, and this is how Judith's work started to advance. Very contemporary looking exhibition. This is her work years later at the Brooklyn Museum in New York and the Center for Feminist Art. So here it's important that the work is seen as, and being presented as one of the most important female artists of the last 100 years because of Judith's story in terms of her ability to overcome disability and obstacles and build a body of work that was significant. And she is the first and I think only artist with Down syndrome to have her work included in the Venice Biennale. This is the 2017 Venice Biennale, and it's a very important international exhibition and a very big advancement for people with Down syndrome to have her work included. I'm going to change gears a little bit and talk about the history of art and disability, and particularly in Western culture. These are some of the words we use in English to describe the work, and we'll touch upon them. But for me, an artist making work who's alive today is a contemporary artist. So I tend to use that expression. If we look to Germany in 1920s, this is a psychiatrist named Hans Prinzhorn. And he worked at the psychiatric hospital in Heidelberg, Germany. And he became interested in the art being made by the patients in the hospital. And he started to show it to collectors and gallerists and critics, and people became very interested in the work that they were seeing and started to see it as art. This all came to a very sudden end in the end of 1930s when Hitler came to power in Germany, and the Nazis condemned people with disabilities and artists, and much of this work was destroyed and hidden, and it stopped the advancement of artists with disabilities in culture. So it's really after the war in the 1940s and 50s where the French artist Jean Dubuffet develops a new interest in art by people who did not go to art school, who were not academically trained, who were self-taught artists, who made work that was very personal to them. He calls it art brut. Brut is the French word for raw. Art that is raw or uncooked from culture. What does it mean if you just have a personal expression that's so direct? What are we seeing? What does that mean? What is human expression? Dubuffet collected thousands of objects, and he was going to leave them to a French museum. But the French did not accept them, seeing them as not cultural enough. So again, the artists are not seen as part of art history. They're separate. He leaves them the town of Lausanne, Switzerland, says, we will house them. And this is the museum, the collection of Art Brut in Lausanne, where his collection is housed, and it's a fantastic opportunity to visit and see the collection that lives there. So it's at this time, Dubuffet's writings, which were mostly in French, were translated into English by an English historian who didn't have a title for the book, and the publisher came up with the title Outsider Art. So this is when we get that word in English in the 1970s. So what else is happening in the 1970s? The late 1960s and 1970s is a time of tremendous social change in many countries around the world. In the San Francisco Bay Area, it's a time of social change, hippie culture, free speech movements, advancements for people with disabilities. And people with disabilities were being deinstitutionalized, asked to leave the hospitals where they had spent their whole lives. Well, what are they going to do? So some artists in Berkeley came together and said, art will be the path forward for people who have lived their lives in institutions. Put paint and art supplies on a table in their own home and said, people can come here. Art will be the path forward, and it will be an opportunity for creative growth. The person will grow through art. This will be the way forward. The title of this is from the garage because it started in the garage, and then Creative Growth bought this auto garage where cars were being repaired a few years later and said, this will be our new home, and the artists can come here and work. So a couple of things. This is the first such organized art program for people with disabilities in the world, and we've turned 50 years old this year. These are some of the earliest photographs I can find of the artists working in Creative Growth. To me, this still looks very institutional, like it could be in a hospital. But we have to remember in the late 1970s, early 1980s, this is a radical idea that people with disabilities could be cultural leaders and participants in such an activity. Here's a group of the artists, probably in 1981 or 1982. So when I was hired as the director of Creative Growth 25 years ago, my mission was to turn this garage into a proper art studio and have the artist's work be seen as contemporary. So I've been working on that for 25 years. This is that same building now, and this is our program. So we currently support 142 artists with intellectual disabilities in our program. They can come up to 5 days a week, and they can stay for their entire life. And some of the artists have been coming every day for 40 or 45 years. So it's really a commitment to art practice. The studio is organized by media, painting, drawing, ceramics, rug making, wood shop. And we don't have a sort of a teaching program. We have all of our staff are artists, like myself, and we support artistic development within the artist as opposed to teaching them or telling them what to do. We feel the voice of the artist is strongest if they are supported, and the best way to support artistic development is just to be around other artists and to be encouraged to do what you want to do. The role of the staff, here you see a staff person on the right. She's supporting an artist named Dan Miller, and she helps him by getting the paper out, by getting his materials ready, and to helping him with whatever he needs. But she doesn't tell him what to do. She doesn't pick the colors of his work. And here a staff artist is helping an artist with her digital media program. Sometimes the artist needs help with technology or other sorts of technical projects. Here a staff person is preparing paint for an artist because she has limited use of her arms and she needs help getting the paint out. So we support the artist in their growth. We have a sort of noted rug making program where the artists design and make handmade rugs. This is in the wood shop. And you can see that some of the work, it becomes very personal and expressive. We have a gallery in the building where we show and sell the work of the artists as well. And that was part of the early design of Creative Growth, that the gallery would be a place to come and see the work and to meet the artists and to meet people with disabilities. So we have openings, a lot of artists. If you know the band Talking Heads, this is David Byrne. He likes to come to Creative Growth along with other artists because artists say, being at Creative Growth reminds me of why I'm an artist, because it's just a creative place and people make art all day long and don't have to think about anything else. We have about 6 exhibitions in the gallery every year. And it's really a place for the public to come and meet the artists and see the work. Most of us, unless it's in our family, do not have people with disabilities in our lives. So we try to change that by providing these opportunities. In the United States right now, we are working under something called first-person thinking, where we ask the artist to make decisions about their life and their work, and we do not make decisions for them. It sounds simple. If you have a life as an independent person, you make your own decisions. People with disabilities often don't get to make their own decisions. So we have changed that. This, for example, is an exhibition of the artist Nicole Storm in our gallery when we asked Nicole, how do you want your work to be seen in the gallery? And this was her solution. She wanted it everywhere. And if you look closely, you'll see Nicole in the box making her work because she wanted to be in the gallery making her work because that was important to her. So this is the artist organizing their own exhibition. We also believe in design as being a way for people with disabilities to advance in culture. This is bags we designed for Marc Jacobs. This is a project we did designing soap bottles for a San Francisco company called Method. And we were careful to present the artists along with the work in their designs. And in the stores, we provided information about disability and who the artists were and how they could be parts of contemporary culture. We sold 2.5 million bottles of soap, and this is a way for us to advance understanding of our work that we would not have been able to do by ourselves. We also have worked with fashion companies. This is our boutique in New York for the Creative Growth for Everybody fashion line. And projects with the department store where we modeled for their clothing campaigns. So how do we use pop culture, essentially, to further the understanding of people with disabilities? I'm going to talk about a few artists right now. This is Dan Miller. Dan is the first artist with autism to have his work purchased by the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Dan is 60 years old. So 60 years ago, we didn't really talk about autism. He was the kid that didn't speak. But his mother was a school teacher, and she tried to spell words with him every night in the hope that he would speak. But he never really did until he came to Creative Growth, and he had learned all the words. They just wanted to come out of his hand, not out of his mouth. So here you see, this is a drawing about light bulbs. So you see the light bulb, and you see he's writing light bulb and other words about electricity, because his uncle had a hardware store, and he used to sit in the hardware store and look at all these things. So it's really as an artist that he can communicate with us. Here again, you see the word electric, circle, and the circles themselves. This is another piece about electricity. It's pretty clear. And like most abstract artists, as his career has advanced, so has his work until the words become complete abstractions. Very large, very contemporary. But Dan also types the same words he's painting on the typewriter. And it forms a sort of modern expression of abstraction, order, disorder, and really allows him to communicate with us in terms of what his ideas are. Here's Dan on the right looking at, you can get to see the size of some of the drawings, selecting drawings for an exhibition of his work in Paris. And it's important to note that we present the Creative Growth Artist's work as contemporary art. So this was a New York exhibition, Dan Miller, his name on the wall, and there's his work. This is one of his drawings in a museum in America last year. And this is a one-man show of his in New York at a contemporary gallery in September. Again, a contemporary presentation by a contemporary artist's work. And meet Monica Valentine. It's important for me to tell you how disability is an important part of the artist's work. So when Monica came to Creative Growth, she started finding colored beads and sequins and pins and started organizing them by color and arranging them in styrofoam forms that she would find in the garbage around the studio, in making large, colorful sculptures in a method that was her own. And the thing that is amazing about Monica is that she is completely blind. She has glass eyes, so she cannot see her work or color. So she says she feels the colors in her hands, and this is her expression of color as a blind person. So sometimes I think that people say, oh, you must direct the artist at Creative Growth, tell them what to do. And I say I could never think to tell her to do that. I'm not that creative. Her solution to becoming an artist was much more original. So by supporting her, the work became stronger. This piece is particularly impactful, the way she articulates the eyes and the head for the place where she has no eyes. She dresses in the same color every day, all in red, all in yellow, all in green, so colors are a very important part of her life. And meet William Scott. So William is an interesting artist. So he grew up in public housing about 2 kilometers from San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And I talk about William's disability with his permission. So William is, as you can see, a black man in America. And he is both autistic and schizophrenic. And he went to public schools in a very poor area without any support. And he would sit in a library after school and draw. And a librarian noticed this and said, I think there's a place in Oakland you should go. So she gave him a train ticket, and he arrived at our door when he was 18 or 19 years old. And he's been working with us ever since. I think William is one of the most compelling contemporary artists in America right now. He has a vision as a painter to change the world through his art and make everyone's lives better. I think we see he has a photographic memory, so he paints buildings and cities and places to make them better and perfect the way he wants them to look. This is a view of San Francisco downtown, where he puts Mickey Mouse in there because he feels like this is happiness. He wants the city to be happy. He wants the people that live there to be happy people. How can I make the world a better place? He combines time. These are new buildings with old streetcars. The past and the present is the same to him. And he wants the world to be a better place. So he's redesigned the whole world, and he's changed the country names. There are names like Janet Jackson Land and Love Train, California, and Michael Jackson Village, because he wants the world to be happy, he wants the countries to be happy, and he wants it to be a beautiful world. What's he writing here? Rebirth of the United States in peace. And we all wish he was our president right now. And these are his wholesome encounters. So when he depicts this utopian world, this new beautiful world, of course people have to live in it. So he paints the people that he wants to live in the world. This is a woman who's going to be in charge of his 40th birthday party. And she's going to bring friends and invite people, and is going to have a big celebration because he wants everyone to be happy. So he's inventing his own reality. And I think that's a very complicated conceptual idea. And I see his work as being almost like a conceptual artist. So William gets conflicted when his paintings don't actually change the world. And I think that pushes him to paint more and more because he really wants the world to change. Here he's self-depicted himself as the world police officer, so he can go through the world and make it better, because the paintings hasn't made it better. And when that didn't work, he formed a friendship with the new Black Jesus, who sort of looks exactly like him. So that's an interesting idea as well, because he really sees himself as a peaceful person who's going to change the world and make your life better. And this is a complicated idea of the spaceship that you see behind these people is a spaceship that brings people back to life who have died from drugs or illness or guns. And he paints these spaceships so they can come back to life and get a second chance, just how he's had another chance. So it's really building a time machine to bring dead people back to life, to make the world better for them. This is more recent work, and you can see his technique of painting becomes more and more realistic. He's a self-taught painter. We don't teach him how to paint. And he has a vision of these buildings. So the buildings in front here are the buildings he grew up in. And the buildings behind are imaginary buildings, the buildings he wants people to live in, because they'll be nicer places, healthier places. People will have better lives. And he will spend sometimes days and weeks just changing the light in the windows because the sun is changing, or it's a different day and he's working on the painting and the weather has changed. So he wants the painting to really be a part of reality. This painting, the new paintings get very large. This painting is 2 meters high. And he did it to celebrate an exhibition of his work in New York and London, because he wanted to, the building on the left is an actual building in San Francisco that he paints from memory. And the buildings on the right are his imaginary buildings, his visions for what New York and London should look like. William also travels through time. So this is William painting himself in 1977 when he was in high school. In high school, he was, a kid with disabilities that nobody liked. So he's repainting himself as young William, basketball star, who's popular and doesn't have disabilities. So he's painting his past life to change his current life. And I think that's a fantastic conceptual idea. And here he is painting himself and his mother, 1974. All the information about his work is written there. We just have to look for it. 1974, another life. This is mother and son. And to me, he's painting them young because he doesn't want his mother to die, get old and die. So by painting them young, they will become young. And if you look at this painting, it really is like a Renaissance painting where they have these pink halos. They're sort of reborn as angels. It's the Pietà, it's the mother and child in this sort of moment of life together and rebirth, making the world a new place. And he painted this picture of Michael Jackson the morning after Michael Jackson died. And it's interesting to me because I think you can see in this little boy everything that's going to happen to him in his life. There's this kind of tension and fear and anticipation of the future already in him. The past and the future are together. So we're going to talk about our partnership with San Francisco Museum of Art, Modern Art right now for the last few minutes of the talk. William, as part of that partnership, William was commissioned to do a very large mural, and this is him finishing the mural at the museum, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but it gives you a sense of how large his work can be. He had never done a painting that size, and I said, William, can you paint a painting as big as the wall? And he said, yes, I can. And I said, what would it look like? And he took a piece of paper, and he drew the mural, and he said, it will look like this, and he did it. An interesting point is that normally these murals at the museum are painted on the wall. The artist does it in the museum, and then it's painted over when the exhibition ends. And I said, well, you know, William can't work that way. He takes him a long time, and he can't get to San Francisco every day, and he likes to work at Creative Growth. So the museum made big panels and delivered them to Creative Growth, and he spent 5 months making the mural. And this is an important point for me, because when we work with artists with disabilities, we have to make accommodations to how they work and not expect them to work how we work. And I think if we don't understand that, we won't sort of advance. So this is the completed mural, and this is the entrance to our exhibition at the SF MoMA. Creative Growth, it was called Creative Growth, the house that art built, and that's the original mural by William Scott. How did this exhibition come to be? When San Francisco hired their new director about 2 years ago, named Chris Bedford, Chris came to San Francisco, and he was told that any director of a contemporary museum in San Francisco should understand the history of art and disability in our region and express that in the museum's collection. So Chris called me and came over on his second month on the job and toured the studio and said, well, if we're going to do something interesting together, what would it be? And I was surprised by that and interested in this. And I said, well, you will purchase a huge number of works for the collection. You will do an exhibition of those works. You will host my annual symposium on art and disability, and we will have our 50th anniversary celebration in the museum. And he said, okay, let's get busy. And within a year, that was accomplished. So the acquisition of work was led by the two curators here, the women in the middle, Jenny Geith on the left, and Nancy Lim on the right. So they made 7 or 8 visits to Creative Growth over a period of a year. And we looked at hundreds, probably thousands of artworks from our 50-year history. And we had to make decisions about what works went into the collection. Should it be one piece from 100 artists? Should it be 100 pieces from one artist? And I suggested that we look at significant collections of artists' work and represent their artistic practice in a complicated way. One of the criticisms I hear about artists with disabilities is that, well, maybe some of them can do one thing, but they do it again and again, and they don't change, and they don't grow. And I wanted to show that they do grow and that their work does change over time, and to express that. So we selected 115 works of art by 9 artists and organized it into the exhibition. The exhibition received enormous press in the United States, several front-page articles in the New York Times, in art magazines, in art journals, in social media, and it's been a very successful advancement for artists with disabilities in America. The exhibition ended just 2 months ago. The partnership with San Francisco Museum of Modern Art has a 3-year contract, so we are entering year 2. In year 2, we'll call for more acquisitions of work for the collection and exhibitions of creative growth artists' work with other contemporary artists in the museum's collection, and the exhibition from SF MoMA traveling to other art museums. So we are starting that as the next phase this year. This is installing the work of Camille Hovert on the back of the galleries. They painted the galleries this sort of beautiful light lavender, which I thought was unexpected and nice, and sort of softened. A lot of the creative growth artists use very strong color, and I think this lavender sort of softened and calmed some of the color. The work on the back wall is by an artist who's depicting her life in an institution, electroshock therapies, her release from the institution, and her move to an independent living situation in an apartment in San Francisco. So it's deeply personal work. This is a suit painted by William Scott that he painted to wear to one of his openings in New York. It's in the exhibition, and the museum took a very huge, high-resolution photograph of all the artists at Creative Growth and installed it in the museum, so you feel like you're in the studio at Creative Growth during the exhibition. A large painting in the museum from one of our artists. And so that kind of takes us back to where we began. So what have we learned? What are we thinking about? We now know who these 2 artists are. We now know how it came to be in the museum. We know how disability has impacted some of these artists and other people that have helped support these ideas of advancement for the last 50 years. This is, there are challenging questions about this field, and we're going to talk about them. There are questions about disability, about academically trained artists versus self-taught artists, about artist biography as it relates to their story, about showing the work as disability work as opposed to contemporary work. So I understand these are complicated questions, and I look forward to talking with you because there are no easy answers. What I'm showing you is a path forward that we have taken to try to advance our artists into leadership positions in the contemporary art world. It's also important to note that the exhibition was extremely popular with the museum. They had more visitors than they normally do. They had visitors that they don't usually have. And they had, they give surveys and they rate the audience response to exhibitions, and they had very high positive response rate to the exhibition. And I think there's something about self-taught artists' work that doesn't relate to art history, so you can see it on your own terms without understanding art history, and I think it opens the doors in the eyes of many more people and broadens the experience for all of us. Again, William's mural, large audience, coming by all the time, looking at it. So because it was supposed to be painted on the wall and then painted out, it now exists as a large painting, and the museum is going to purchase it for their permanent collection. And my last slide here. So this is William Scott on the right, and that's his mother on the left, in front of the portrait of them together young. And it's important for me to think that, William grew up 2 kilometers from the museum, but how long it took him to make that voyage from his house 2 kilometers away into the museum. And it's a voyage that took him 60 years of his life and took creative growth in many people that have supported the lives and the advancement of people with disabilities to help bring him into this moment. So thank you for your interest, and we'll have some discussion now, and I look forward to your questions and responses.
Good afternoon. This is Yukiko Koide. Nice to meet you all. Well, for me, well, I really like to hear that Tom talks about their artists, his artist, William Scott, Judith Scott. He talks about the personal story and history, and he closely watched those artists and what drives them, what motivates them, and what are the story behind their work. Well, we are not that position to know about the work and background. However, Tom is a person who delivers all these messages. Some of the stories are bright and optimistic, and some of the stories are very dark and gloomy. Something that we don't want to know sometimes. However, Tom interprets and set up the hypothesis behind the work, and I like to hear his story. And although its hypothesis is very compelling and persuasive, today's theme is about how we can appreciate the work that is done by those with disabilities as contemporary art. As a conclusions, well, we need to have some representative or the speaker like Tom to speak about their work. For the recent years, we have more opportunity to show the artwork of those with disabilities. We have more experience to get in touch with those work. However, to be honest with you or candid, but it's still in the category of disabilities. Art of those disabilities, the deep story behind the work is not fully delivered to the audience yet. In case of Japan, the supporters of those artists with disabilities are in the welfare categories. So bridging between the welfare and art, and we have to bridge them together and have to have the distance between them should be shorter. And we do have some kind of representatives or the speaker to bridge the two worlds. Today, I'd like to ask Tom about deeply furthermore about that topic. And I have some indices and topics that I want to talk with Tom. Well, some of them have diversified, but these are the points that I like to ask you. The first one, I like you to ask you about the 2024 this year. For Tom, I think 2024 is a very challenging year for you. This celebrates the 50th anniversary of creative growth. And that's the 25th anniversary of Tom's when started the creative growth, and we have presidential election in the United States. It was a turbulent time. How do you feel about this year, 2024? Or you don't want to answer the question, but
Well, I have to answer the question. It's been a very difficult year where we have seen advancement of artists with disabilities through the SF MoMA exhibition come to a new place after many decades of work at a time that's exciting, and we see more and more of our artists and the younger artists with disabilities having more self-awareness and growth for themselves in the art world. It's a very challenging time in America right now, and we're all pretty terrified about what the future will be. At Creative Growth, we always learn and get strength from our artists because as people with disabilities, they have had often terrible life situations where they have not had opportunity, where they've not had privilege, where they've not been given an easy way to advance. So they are strong, and they will help us get through the turbulent times ahead, and we will look to them to advance. And the artists are doing great, and their work advances, and that's what sustains us.
well, I also, out of my personal curiosity, I'd like to ask you, in this year's election, the U.S. president or in the blue party, also inside no, red, turned to red party, and also the political party. Does that affect the management of the creative growth? The change in the political parties and the change in the presidency.
Creative Growth, we can talk about our funding. Creative Growth is funded mostly privately and through the state of California, not through the federal government. So we are not that much at risk. It's a terrible time for people with disabilities in general because a lot of the legal advancements and social supports they get as people will be challenged. But for Creative Growth itself, it's difficult to be in our environment where you feel like most Americans, more than half of Americans, do not value the work that we do or value the lives of people with disabilities. So that's a very difficult thing to feel. But we will get through it, and it does not have direct financial impact on the center.
Okay, let me get back to the art topic. I'd like to ask you, well, Tom, you said always, we are doing art. We are part of art world. That's what you always say, Tom. However, the creative growth is basically for the facilities for the people with disabilities. You have to focus on the health and also safety of the people who visit the creative growth. You have to take care of all these visitors. How are you aware of that you are the part of the art world, and how did you execute as such? So what is your actual action in line with your message?
I think it's very simple. When I came to Creative Growth 25 years ago and I walked into the studio where all the artists are working, there's no reality other than this is an art center and artists working. And the other realities around the artists' lives and disability are, of course, things we're very concerned about in terms of health care, transportation, living conditions. We pay attention to that. But, today we sit in an art college, and it's not so different. I mean, if you came into these classrooms here on this campus, You would see artists working, students working, trying to find their own way. They have personal problems, they have health problems, they have family problems, they have money problems. So it's not that different. So I think we have to understand that being an artist in society is challenging. It's not easy for anybody. And I always like to say, I went to art school. No one's family was happy that they were in art school. So the decision to be an artist comes with challenges. And I think artists understand that, and that's how we support the community.
So in practicality, who can participate in creative growth, or how are they supposed to transport, and when are they having lunch, and where and how? So that kind of concerns you have, obviously, I think.
Sure. So people come to creative growth not because they've made art, but because they are interested in our program. So if you had a child or a sister or brother with autism, for example, and you thought maybe creative growth would be a good place for them, you can bring them for a tour. And we would ask them if they felt like this is a place they wanted to be. And if they could express that they felt happy about that, then they would start in our program 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And they would stay for their whole life until they left or until they caused some harm to the community, hurt somebody else, which almost never happens. So there is no obligation to make art, but everybody always has. And I think that's kind of a remarkable thing about our community. I think about if all of us sat in this room and I said, you're going to sit here for the rest of your life, here's your table, do you want to make art? Would all of us make art? Maybe not. So I think there's something really supportive about our studio that encourages creativity. And I think that people with disabilities who've often been told that they can't do anything, when they're told they can do something, they welcome that opportunity. I think many of us have fears that we won't be good enough, we won't know what to do, we'll be afraid that we'll be criticized, and I find that people with disabilities have the capacity to take risks when they've given an opportunity.
Next question. So Tom, you have been 25 years as a director, and during these 25 years the evaluation of the artist totally changed, significantly changed, I think. Do you think any breakthrough events? If you have, please tell us.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think we were talking about this earlier with some people on the panel, that the field in which we work, supporting artists with disabilities, has come from the artists themselves and their work, and then collectors of art have become interested in their work. And then galleries have become interested in their work because people want to buy it. And then museums have become interested in their work because the people who buy their work in the galleries are involved in the museums. So it's really been a bottom-up path to acceptance. It has not come from the art world down. It's been us knocking at doors and saying we will be part of the art world. And that happens when a couple of visionary museum directors, curators, influential cultural leaders like yourself, like people in New York that we've worked with, said, I think this is important work. And if they're influential with their colleagues and their community in other museums and galleries, then people start to follow them. So we can do the work to have the artist's work be good and supported, but other people really have to accept it too for it to go to the next level. And that's what's starting to happen. But it's taken, we were making the joke about it the other day, that it's been little by little, very slowly over time. And then kind of suddenly all at once, we're at a moment in the United States where there's a different kind of acceptance. I was giving a talk in Australia at an art and disability program last week, and the director said, well, when I'm in America, I go to museums now and I see disability work a lot. We don't see that in Australia yet. And I said, well, it's just starting to become something that people want to include. And we can make those decisions. And, and I think that, we have to be expansive in terms of who we consider an artist to be. And if we have a narrow consideration that an artist can only be somebody that went to art school and can talk to us about art history, then that's a very narrow definition of artist. And I think that we will not have as rich of a cultural experience as if we include more people.
So gradually, it's been evolved, and eventually, today, where you are, you are here. And Tom, yourself, do you have, very memorable moment or events? Because we want to, take some references from yourself, your experiences. Can you think of a very memorable events? For example, from the disability, artist to contemporary artists. Is there any, incident or epidemic event? Could you think of any?
What are the important moments? I think there are always the moments with the artists when you hear their life stories and you see how it's reflected in their art and what they've gone through to create such positive, work. So, something like working with Judith Scott was a privilege. Judith did not have language, and we became friends, and we had to find a way to communicate and speak with each other. And, so we sort of became family. And when Judith died, I was there with her sister and at her funeral, and you realize you have these relationships with people and how important their art practice and creative growth is to their lives. That's that's an experience I didn't expect coming to be the director of an art center. That was very impactful. In terms of more external projects, I think being at the Venice Biennale, where both Judith Scott and Dan Miller were represented, was really a historic moment. And as was the opening of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art exhibition. And I feel like 25 years of work and 50 years of creative growth have really come to a point that was beyond what our hope was 50 years ago in terms of what could happen. So those are moments that come to mind.
Thank you very much. I myself also was involved in introduction of Judith's work. So her, she is also one of the memorable figure in my life. And probably the artwork, the disability, artist with a disability, if this can be recognized as art, I think recognition from the external people is very important. When it comes to Judith, Dr. John McGregor, outsider art expert, was involved in the study of Judith's work, and he published a book about her. So external experts or a researcher or curator, I think they must be interested and they must commit themselves to introduce them. What do you think about it?
Well, yes, of course, external people have to be involved. I like to use the example of, if I say, my dog is the cutest dog, it doesn't mean as much as if the dog wins a medal in the dog show, because then other people are saying he's the cutest dog, right? And I think when other people give you recognition that's not based on your own prejudice, it's much more meaningful. So who are those people? I think, John McGregor's writing about Judith Scott is more about her biography and her personal journey than it is about her work specifically. And I think that was more in relationship to outsider art and our understanding of the isolated artist. But I think of Judith Scott as, in the way you presented her, which is a contemporary woman artist whose, personal expression is unique and vibrant and contemporary. And that is the way that I like the creative growth artists to be seen. I'll add that Judith Scott's exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum, which I showed a photograph of, was organized by the director of the Feminist Center there. The catalog is available from the Brooklyn Museum, and the curator has written a phenomenal essay at the opening of the catalog about disability culture, feminism, and social change and social change in the 70s and 80s in America that led to the advancement of women artists and artists with disabilities. And if you're interested in those ideas, her essay is quite powerful.
Because of the time constraint, well, I have to ask you about something about money. In a creative growth, I'd like to ask you about the financial situation of the creative growth. You have the 3 income streams. Can I show you all this breakdown, revenue breakdown? This year's budget is 4 million in this year's budget. No, sorry, I'm not good at figures. Maybe the unit is different. Maybe please look at this pie chart. In California, from the state of the California government support, so it's about 230 million yen. For donation subsidies, 230 million yen. And artwork sells 150 million yen. 150 million yen artwork sells. It's a substantial amount. Therefore, Tom and the creative growth enter into the contemporary art market to sell their artists' work, and they focus their effort on that. Having said that, just fundraising, just doing fundraising, you have another method. You can find another approach. However, you focus on your effort on selling your artist's works. So what is your thinking behind that? Why is that you focus on selling your artist's work to the market?
Yes, well, the American model of running art centers are a little bit different than other countries. We don't have as much government support as some programs do. The government support we get is from the state of California, not from the federal government. There is no federal government support in America for artists. The art sales. So it's important for me to say that when art sells, half of the money goes to the artist and half of the money comes to creative growth. So that's a normal gallery division of income. So several of the artists who are very successful have very high incomes. We also pay all of the artists. When we pay artists, we have a collective pool of money that gets divided, so every artist gets some money for being at Creative Growth. So we pay them as part of our community. Well, $1 million in art sales. When I started at Creative Growth, we had $10,000 in art sales a year, and now we're at over $1 million in art sales over a year, so that's grown a lot. But it's important to remember, by contemporary art sales, those are very low numbers. So our work is very expensive for disability art, and it's very cheap for contemporary art. So part of our advancement is to move our price points up to have because we see the work as having the same value as other contemporary art. So if you want to play the game in the art world, you have to play the game. And the game means galleries, collectors, exhibitions, and pricing. And pricing is very complicated. If you raise an artist's work, it changes the places it can be seen and who will buy it. So at Creative Growth, if you came to Creative Growth and you're invited, 140 artists, you can come into the studio and the gallery, and there are things for, $10 and $50, and the things for $1,000 and things for $5,000, and the work that sells for $10,000 and $20,000 and $50,000. We don't sell that at Creative Growth. We sell that at art fairs, and we sell that in New York, and we sell that in other projects, because that's where people who spend that kind of money buy art. So we really have to understand that the art market in itself is a complicated environment, and we try to follow those programs. It's also important to note that a Creative Growth artist can choose not to sell their work and keep it private. We only have one artist that does that, but that's their choice. We represent them if they want that. And part of the art sales, I was talking to an art studio, art and disabilities program in Europe, a year ago, and the director said, well, we get enough money from the government, so we really don't have to try very hard. And she said, I think that's why you sell a lot of work, because you sort of have to. That's where your money comes from. You need to you need to have your own business. And I think that's true.
However, for me, not only just raising the fund, you are into the art market, you have another evaluation or reputation or recognition you can get by entering into the art market itself. So you have another recognition, not only for the purpose of fundraising. My question was not good, maybe. So getting into the art market is a very challenging and difficult task. You have now we're visiting the art University of Arts. All the students will have the difficulty in enter into the art market. Tom, you are the director of also the Creative Growth Center. It's not easy to get into the art market as a director. However, you continue to do that. You will continue to do that, right?
Yes. I mean, the art market is very complicated. It's very complicated right now. Art sales are very slow around the world. There's been a downturn in about the last year in terms of art sales. So that's challenging. If you participate in art fairs, they're very expensive. If you bring your work, the reason why I have to leave Kyoto tomorrow, I've been here for 2 days, and I have to leave tomorrow because we're doing the art fairs in Miami at Art Basel, because that's where the collectors are and that's where we bring the work. So I think that is, a challenge for us. And to do an art fair like that's very expensive. You have to ship the work, you have to bring the staff, you have to rent the booth, you have to have all these expenses. You have to meet the collectors, you have to try to sell it, you have to collect the work, you have to ship it to them, you hope that they pay. So these are not easy. But that, and I don't understand, I think you were asking about donations and grants. No, okay, yeah. So we are, for me as the director, it's very important to look at the organization and to see that we have 3 ways that money comes in, because that makes us a stronger organization. I think if I was just relying on government support, I don't think that's a creative solution where we can think creatively, because you're in sort of alignment with the government, and that money often comes with constraints. Our government support, the government does understand what art is. They support people with disabilities to get vocational training so they can get jobs. So we have to describe art as a profession. They don't understand art fairs. So art sells not only supports the income, but it also supports the development of the artist's career. So when you were asking about how the artists become seen as more contemporary and how the artists advance, a lot of it happens through the fairs, because that's where the curators, the academics, the collectors are all there. And that's where you meet people who see and understand the work. And that's where you make alignments and partnerships and friends that will support the work that you do. So that's not just about selling work, it's about being a part of the art world.
Thank you very much. And in reality, the collector of the work of creative growth, what kind of people are they? The collector of the artwork from creative growth.
Nice people, I hope. I think it comes from different places. There are the earliest people we sold work to were people that had this a little bit old-fashioned idea about art brut and outsider art. That the European tradition of the artist who was hidden away, working secretly, without an understanding of the art world or contemporary culture, and those were the first people that became interested in disability art, because artists with disabilities were often in institutions, so that was the first alignment. The people that started to become collectors after that, the younger people, it's interesting, we have a lot of young collectors and people that are less aligned with the traditional art world, because they feel that they can understand our artists' work without having an academic degree in art. If you've had the experience of going into, a gallery in New York or London or Tokyo, it can be inhibiting. You can have a modern gallery and you can have a painting on the wall, and it can be very expensive, and there could be no information provided, and you might not know what it means. You might not know what questions you can ask. You might not understand it. And that might not be, a moment that that encourages you to experience art or be an art collector. If you have an understanding of art history, you might understand why an all-white painting costs $1 million, because it's a painting about painting and an artist's response to art history. If you come to creative growth and you look at our artist's work, I can't tell you what it means. The artist can't tell you what it means. It means what you want it to mean. And your encounter with that work is direct. You respond to it or you don't. And I think that lowers the sort of discomfort around encountering art and makes it a really human experience. I like to use the example of, you're in the car, you turn on the radio, and you hear a song, a voice you've never heard before. Who is that singing? Isn't that just the most amazing voice? I want to run out and buy that recording, right? We've all had that moment, right? And we don't allow ourselves to feel that way with art so much. We get afraid to experience what we're seeing. And I think that with creative growth art, we're like the song on the radio. You know, here it is. Did you like any of the work you saw today that I showed you? If you did, that's great. If you didn't, that's great. You know, that's how you respond. If you liked the work that you saw and it was interesting to you, that's all anyone really needs to know. You know, the experiences I told you about the artists provide additional information in terms of how their life experience has led them to make that work, and it gives us a further understanding. But if you don't like the way it looks, there's no conversation to have, really. And I think that is a really important difference between a creative growth collector and maybe, you know, you see what was the big art auction with the, you know, I mean, there was a big art auction yesterday that, you know, the $60 and $80 million paintings and this kind of thing. That's, you know, those are financial transactions. They're not really about encountering art.
Thank you very much. So I would like to pose you brief questions, several questions. So I myself are dealing with the artwork of the artist with a disability, but I myself feel dilemma or conflict when it comes to dealing with those artists. Do we have to focus on disability itself or artwork itself? So there is a stigma or prejudice against the disability. We must overcome such, prejudice. Otherwise, we cannot understand or, interpret the artwork itself. However, the understanding about the artist with disabilities sometimes will be required. So the artwork that is created by disabled people, sometimes there is a resistance when you are trying to sell those artworks that is made by disabled people and earn money. Do you know what I mean? So the resistance, sometimes I feel. How about you yourself? How did you overcome such dilemma or so those difficulties?
Sure. There's been all kinds of difficult questions and difficulties in terms of presenting the work. And I think that one of the first challenges is the artist biography. If you look at the story that I told you of Judith Scott, I mean, if you're interested in an artist biography, hers is pretty compelling, right? Separated from her sister, institutionalized, no language, coming out, finding a visual language to communicate, making work. That's a compelling, that's a movie. I mean, that's a compelling story. However, if you don't like the work, we wouldn't be talking about her. So for me, it's as simple as if the work is interesting to you visually, there's a whole story to tell in terms of who the artist is, in the context, in the situation under which it was made. And that will add richness to our understanding of the work. Just like we read about the author on the back of the novel. Oh, who made this? Why would they be interested in this, right? And we know that about contemporary artists as well. We know that about Van Gogh. We know that about Murakami. We know that about artists. We know where they come from. We know what their influences are. But that doesn't make them great artists. So it adds to our understanding of the language that they're using. So that's the way I think of it. When I get questions, it doesn't happen as much anymore, thankfully. But, we'd have art on the wall, and you'd start in an art fair, and people would ask first about the disability. What's their disability? What's their disability? What's wrong with them? You can't answer those questions because they're insulting. So you really have to move beyond that. I like to say that you can ask any question, because there are a lot of questions, so you can ask any questions you have about the artist and the work, but you can't sort of be disrespectful to who the person is and what disability means and diminish a person because of their experience.
So it's about time to close here. Sorry, we have 3 more minutes. So then, diversity. This is another question I would like to pose you, Tom. Diversity. Everybody talks about diversity here in Japan recently. But when it comes to diversity, it's totally different depending on what kind of perspective you have. For example, Bay Area, where creative growth exists, diversity, you already have diversity in there. Looking at the races, ethnicity, the language you speak, and also gender, sexual, preferences. And especially when it comes to creative growth, I think that's the kind of environment where you are at. Yesterday, I heard that there are 8 languages used in creative growth. And Tom is every day responding to such, diversity, different languages. Diversity you have already established, created. You already have it. How do you respond? Because it's, we are very curious because in Japan we don't have. I think that's a very positive thing to have diversity. However, but then you have difficulty, right?
Yes, well, we live in a city near San Francisco that is very diverse in terms of the people that live there. So we have a natural kind of a disability in terms of people's ethnicity, their race, their languages, their ages. So we have a very mixed group of artists that we support. Our questions around disability are more around the culture of disability and the diversity around that. Disability is not one thing. There's physical disability, there's intellectual disability, there's all kinds of disability. And how do we blend disability culture within our program? If you're in a wheelchair, people can speak to you like you're not smart. Why is that? But this is the prejudice we bring to disability. I think William Scott is a genius artist, but he has an intellectual disability. He's one of the most intellectually interesting artists that I know. How do we sort of work on those ideas of disability within culture? And diversity, I think for us means making our world more diverse by bringing our artists' voices into that. So I think that's our challenge.
Well, thank you very much. We can we take questions from the floor? Okay, then. So we'd like to close the first session for now. Thank you. Now, I'd like to start with the second session titled Appreciating the Art of Those with Disabilities, a Contemporary. As speakers, we have Hosaka Kenji, Mr. Osaka, Director of Shiga Museum of Art, and we have Ms. Ouchi Kaoru, the Curator of Tokyo Shibuya Koen Dori Gallery, Director of the Museum Contemporary Art Tokyo, and we have Mr. Tom DiMaria and Ms. Koide Yukiko, and the moderator. I'd like to ask Mr. Yamamoto Hiroki, of the Cultural Studies Scholar and Associate Professor of Jisen Women's University. Okay, today I'd like to serve as a moderator for the second session. Again, my name is Mr. Yamamoto. I speak too much, as typical of the cultural studies scholar, but I will focus on my function as a moderator. So I'd like to start with a brief self-introduction, and this is a very difficult theme as a discussion, appreciating the art of those with disabilities, a contemporary. As Tom mentioned, for the past 50 years, he said it's not a one easy answer. He said it was an impressive comment. So while I was in Shinkansen bullet train on the way here yesterday, so there is no one or single answer to that question. So through the discussion, I like to have widely accept the scope of discussion in this here. So I like to start with my self-introduction in related to our topics. One slide, I will deliver just one message from one slide. This is about the self-introduction. I specialize in the East Asian and also the history of war and the colony of history in Asian region. As in the context of art history, what is included, what is excluded? I like to focus on the process and the mechanism during the process. And next slide, please. And this is, well, I'd like to ask you about the definition of the art, like the art of those with disabilities and outside art. When I was in Ishikawa Prefecture, there are a lot of interest from the graduation thesis of students there. So I was in charge of that project, and I was in the curation there in this project. And one of my students said that when you say about outside art or the art of those with disabilities, when you bind all those categories, there's something that you cannot see. By having this term or the concept, you can make something visible. On the other hand, that was an impressive comment, so I like to put that in a discussion topic as well. And my interest, as I said earlier, within the art history, I like to pick up the what is excluded, what is included, and why, and how it happened. So last year, I co-edited this book titled "The De-Imperializing Japanese Art History" with Odawara Nodoka. Now we are working for the translation for the English into English and Korean languages. And these are, I like to pick up the indices. So out of all the art history, some factors are excluded or removed, or the artists are excluded from the art of history. I pick up and how they are entangled. And the red fonts here, these are the artists who are categorized or involved in the outside art world. So decentralization of the art history is the one that I put focus on. So out of that context, well, outside of art is my also theme of my focus, and the outside art is also excluded in the art history. And Iyama Yuki, through the visual art, he asked about the questions about the society. And first, she created with her younger sister with disabilities to create their visual work. So Japan is consistent of based upon the majority, like the healthy people or Japanese. That's how the Japanese society is consisted of. And then, so also, Mr. Nagatsu also mentioned about the current position of the art activities that are involved by the people with disability in Japan. So out of that changes in order to support those activities, I like to think about how we should do, and I like to talk with Thompson, who is actively work on the forefront of these art. So and also the other professionals who are actively work in this field. And I would like to have the question and answer session afterwards. Thank you. That's all from me. And then Ochi-san, please. So this is the Ochi Kaori is also curator of Tokyo Shibuya Koen-dori Gallery. It's in the it belongs to the Museum of Contemporary Art Tokyo, and the section of the inclusion and the arts manages this gallery. So I'm in the position of, because of this position, I was invited to this symposium after the 2020. I have an opportunity to contact, interact with artists with disabilities. I'm very honored to have this opportunity to speak in the symposium. And also I'd like to also introduce these arts as a current position. So I'd like to introduce and some of the work I do as a self-introduction. First, I'd like to talk about the Tokyo Shibuya Koen Gallery. It was opened in February 2020. This is a mission. Through the art, we will promote the understanding of diversity and contribute to realize the inclusive society. This is very impressive. It was at a time of the Tokyo Olympic Games. Well, it was postponed to the 2021. So that mission was created at that time. So one of the pillars is that art brute. Because as a mission, we will create an opportunity to experience each individual diversified curiosity and values. And this is a definition of art brute by the gallery here. This is a historical wording. It's adopted in our lecture series. We focus on art expression of ideas of people, unique ideas of people without art education.
Here, exterior view of the gallery. It is located in Shibuya, and we have bustle of people coming and going, and the building itself, which houses the gallery, is a labor welfare hall of Shibuya Ward. And the corner of the building has such a historical appearance, as you can see, and the previous slide shows a glazed space along the street and called an exchange space. This area is designed for workshops, talks, and other gatherings. And there is a series of workshops for children, as you can see in this slide. And we have sign language interpreters and support staffing available. As a concept, children without disabilities can come together. So I would like you to have a brief image of our programs by looking at these pictures. So one of the projects here was a residency for Mizushima Takayuki, a blind artist based in Kyoto. And this is a workshop led by Enomoto Toru, a deaf actor, in which participants, and try to express themselves with their bodies and facial expressions without using, vocabulary. And from here on, I would like to talk about exhibitions, and this is the opening exhibition. And we have 3 to 4 times a year. We have a theme of Art Brut project and exhibitions related to them. As with the exchange program mentioned earlier, the curator belonging to the gallery are in charge of their own projects. And here are some introduction from the Art Brut centered projects. So there is a series of exhibitions that consists mainly of works that have earned a reputation for having been exhibited as Art Brut works. So in relation to the series, so as a joint project with the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, it is a larger than usual, traveling to venue in cities, wards, towns, and villages in Tokyo. And as we have already distributed the flyers, we are currently holding this exhibition at the gallery. And a project with Edward Gomez as guest curator. And we have created such event. So these are the past works and past exhibitions. So these exhibitions, we have invited 5 artists from Creative Growth. And when it comes to Art Brut genre of art, so through self-taught techniques, for example, this gloves, utilizing gloves or origami, so the objects that you can touch and feel through your daily lives, so these can be also seen as artworks. So I'm running out of my time, sorry. So this is what we would like to promote. So keywords are display and exchange. So when it comes to display or exhibition, we would like to introduce various artworks, including Art Brut and others. And when it comes to exchange, we would like to put together a variety of participants by providing accessibility and availability. So that's the key pillar of our activities. And finally, I would like to introduce something I am very interested in. So in my school days, I oftentimes think about the artists with disabilities. And this is one of the encounter, this book I encountered at these days. Kuniichi Uno-san is the author of this book. and it is a continuous inspiration of myself in my career. For example, so in the literature of minorities, even what is merely literature is related to life and death. And so if it is not possible to be independent, however, it is possible to create an area or a field as if they seems to be independent. So that kind of text or wordings that he provided to me. That's a kind of inspiration I had. So he points out kind of politics. So politics is really, related to our daily life. And for example, if some person draw a picture, and if this person has a disability, oftentimes there comes an adjective of disabled. If you are, intentionally, remove the wordings like object of disabled, but then that's very difficult again. Therefore, pure art, to appreciate that work as a pure art is very, very challenging. So there is a significant meaning in which we are not able to deal this work as a pure art. So that kind of thing I have been, thinking about throughout my career. So there is an inequality in our society, and we are trying to be aware of such inequality. So the sense and physical body and mode of the art can be diverse. So that's the assumption of today's art, and we need to provide a variety of accessibility and modes. I think that's the starting point. And one of my themes include contemporary art, and there is a side of interpreter or appreciator or evaluator. It's easy for us to change evaluator. And also I would like to think about such change is requested by whom and how. In my individual work, experiences, I would like to have continuous study or research into these fields, and that lead to significant evaluation of the artworks. So that's my personal opinion. So this is my final slide. Thank you. Thank you very much. So Hosaka-san, please. My name is Kenjiro Hosaka. Nice to meet you. Could you put up my slide, please? So this is apartment in Japan, Arbrit. So that's this, apartment you can find across the country. I'm not sure if this, owner of this apartment really understand the word, meaning of the word, Arbrit. So this is the world we are living in Japan. So I would like to talk about the encounters of myself and Albert. So in 1981, there is an opening of Setagaya Gallery, and naive art was the theme of this art gallery.
Here, this including the people with mentally retardedness. We don't use that expression in Japanese recently, but Setagaya Museum have that artwork collection. So I was able to expose to the artwork with people with disabilities. At the graduate school, I encountered the book of the Dr. Prince Hall, and here And the top is a Malcred, Max Ernst, and Koga Harue's image. These are the image sources. However, all these work was not is omitted from the history, art history. So I felt the righteous indignation at that time. So it should be in a life work. What is excluded from the art history, like the Koide-san mentioned, there's not able one. This is curated by Hattori Tadashi. I mentioned Arashin. Well, I was exposed to the number of exhibition, and in 2000, I was a curator of the Kyoto Modern Art Museum. And then I was a very ambitious young curator. So I had a dream that if we curate the art brut, maybe I can curate an overseas when we encounter the collection of art brut from Lausanne, Switzerland. Now I got an offer from the NOMA to curate exhibitions. It was 2009. Another one. This is Iwate. I was served as a judge. I was alone as a judge at the Iwate Prefectural Art. So I asked the someone with the disabilities artwork, and she was awarded, and it was covered in the local media or newspaper. In Noma, I curated a solid exhibition. So it was very good to have the solo exhibition or the exhibition with two artists. And also, I supervised the Mizunoki an art gallery in this for the art booth in Kyoto. And also, I was involved in the policy making committees in this art with the disabilities for art booth. I supervised a book related to art booth, and it was published. And two books in the same year, and the title was printed red. And as for the another one, when I was curate one of the exhibitions, I asked the architect to design and display their work as a jewels, and also I also asked to shoot the making. And also, I was in charge of the part of art brut in the Japanese history book. Here, I was moved to this current museum. They started the collection of art brut work, so I curated the exhibitions, and thanks to the cooperation of Koide-san, I collected the Ukai's work, and last year, and all these from the Japanese Foundation, and we were able to cover more than 200. So, and Koide-san asked me to write about the okay, and so I've been involved in this art build for more than 20 years. Koide-san, please. Yukiko Koide, thank you very much for participating in the first section as well. So I was involved in exhibition work for a long period of time. Here, this is an old story. When I first was involved in the exhibition, the media, I was aware of the exhibition or the art of media. For the first time, it was 1974. Maybe Hosoka-san was not born even at the time. In Daimaru, Tokyo, this is a catalog of the Andy Warhol exhibition held there. Today, we talk about the disabilities and art. I like to focus on two artists. So, what exhibition can do, I like to explain about it, including my self-introduction. This is Judith Scott. As Tom mentioned earlier, she suffers from the Down syndrome. After 40 years, she visited and attended creative growth and started her work. This impressive work. This is my curation in 2001. This is solo exhibition of Judith. The response was very good. However, unfortunately, the art stakeholders had no responses. So it was more than 20 years ago. So it was a time the art and disabilities are not well connected. And this is the San Francisco MoMA. This is exhibition. This is a collections exhibition in 2024. This year, in the 20th anniversaries, Judith Scott's work was displayed with Ruth Asawa's work, and also in the back, the framed Annie Alba's work, and in front Sheila Hicks' works. All these women artists utilized familiar materials in a life, and then it's in handcrafts. So after 20 years, Judith's work was displayed beyond the category of the outside of art, and I was very happy to see that her work in a contemporary art gallery. She passed away in 2005, but her work is left so that her work delivers her life and communicates her life. Still, and Ukai Yuichiro, he's 29-year-old, and he suffered from autism, and he visits the studio every day based in Shiga Prefecture. It was recognized, his work is recognized in contemporary art by the European collectors and curators and gallerists. One of the collectors is Cows. One of his collectors, as last year, Ukai visited Cow's studio. It was taken last year in a drawing center in Brooklyn. The Ukai's exhibition is being held. The Way I See It is the title of the exhibition at the drawing center in New York. So it's literally translated as the way I see it, the person sees it. But Dr. Tempo Grandin, who is a doctor in animal behavior, he has published the book, The Way I See It. Well, in Japanese, it's the sense of how the people with autism sees it. So the way I feel it is I think, right translation in Japanese.
And this is a scene taken from the exhibition. And Cows, at early stage, graffiti or manga, he started to collect them. because nobody tried to collect them than myself. Museum were not interested in them, so he started to collect. And also, his collection includes like ukai, the artist with the disabilities, and also outsider artworks are also included. And through these exhibition, how do I call it, inner closed passion, inner closed fever, that is not outward but inward. The way of drawing, this is a kind of expression of inner closed passion or fever. So that's something I felt from this exhibition. And Lithuania, at Vilnius, there is an exhibition. And this is not an exhibition for the artists with the disabilities, but instead pop art exhibition. So Arnas Gerunas, curator, in combination with Ozaki Tetsuya, thanks to his support, this exhibition was held. So this is the title of this exhibition. So back in Edo period, there is a traditional Japanese drawing and manga, anime, and Showa and Heisei era, and all these pop arts, folk arts were exhibited. Like Ukai's work has been exhibited together with renowned artists, pop artists, like Utagawa Kuniyoshi, Kawanabe Kyosai, Murakami Takashi. So by this, his work was proven to be that the one of the art that inherit Japanese DNA of artworks. And this is Ukai's work. Like mentioned, showing the example of Ukai and Judas, artwork and art history, they are not fixed at all. It's kind of changing and kind of fluid, and the interpretation changes, and the position of the art world, their position of art world also changes. Therefore, going forward, utilizing this tool, such as exhibition, I hope that the artwork created by the people with disability can, change their existence. So that's my hope. Thank you very much. So let's have crosstalk or open discussions. So to Tom, I would like to ask you. So for presentations from everyone here, do you have any comments? But before then, I have a question from myself. So presentation of Koide-san. She mentioned about Shiseido Gallery. And compared to the general public's critics, there is not a big, attention from, specialists, art specialists. So that's what she said. But in U.S., you have shown us an example of a contemporary gallery, and you said they garnered lots of attentions. But at the earlier stage, did you encounter such difficulties, and how that difficulty, changed over the time? So that's my question.
Thank you. I thought the presentations were all very interesting, and I feel that the work that's being done in Japan by people with disabilities is some of the most compelling contemporary art in Japan right now. And I think, my questions in thinking about critical response is complicated because it's been a long path for us to start to get critical acclaim. We get writing more about an artist and the center and the acquisition or the partnership with the museum more than we get a specific critical evaluation of an artist as if you'd have in an art world. So the work is still being treated differently as a sort of a movement or an occurrence as opposed to an artist practice. So this is something I think collectively we need to continue to work on. I think there's a hesitancy in art critics to know what language to use and how to write about our artists. So I think that poses a problem too. I would also say that, you know, all of the panelists showed very compelling, vibrant exhibitions in Japan of artists with disabilities. I would ask respectively the question, why is the word art brut being used more than contemporary art or more than disability art? Because I think that keeps it on the margins of contemporary work, and I think that prevents critical attention from it from the mainstream art press. So that's, I think, either a challenge or a question I would have for the other panelists in terms of why that word is preferred here.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone who would like to answer to Tom's question? Any response from yourself? Anybody who are on the podium? Yes, thank you. So I've been involved in the museum, and for contemporary art, some people love it. However, the other people don't love it. And art brut outside of art. So the artwork by the disabled people, there are of course someone who dislike it. However, the other person love it, and they are insisting that they should be evaluated highly, more, and those people, exist. Like Tom said, when you get in the car and turn on the radio, you just love it. You fell in love in the music, So that kind of power, the artwork has it. So I think. So there are many people who directly appreciate the artworks by the disabled people, I believe. I am working at a museum which is not dedicated to the art brut. So the evaluation of the general public, we shouldn't, too much stuck in that. Because if we stuck in the evaluation of the general public, then we are become not able to, appreciate correctly the art, expert who are in the mainstream. So I think that's the very, sensitive and very difficult and complex arena, being involved in the art brut. That's how I think. So that's very important to me. Thank you very much. Koide-san and Ouchi-san, I would like to invite your opinion as well. Koide-san, outside art and art brew. So all these categories exist, and you have been curating the artists and also artworks. And as Hosaka-san mentioned, a certain distance exists in between mainstream and non-mainstream. So general public and critics, we have hesitancy to, categorize, making sweeping generalization. So what's your view on that, Koide-san? Well, Japan compared to US and Europe, I think there are big differences. So museum stakeholders and also collectors in Japan, Of course, I should not make sweeping generalization. However, it tends to that they are conservative. Oftentimes, they would like to deal with the artwork that is highly appreciated or that has a name value, that is popular, well known. However, the museum stakeholders whom I met overseas would like to create new value. So that's what I feel, and I'm very fortunate to be able to encounter such people overseas. And when you see artworks in front of in front of your eyes, you are very willing to discover new value. So that's the difference between Japan and overseas.
I have one additional question. It's not about the sense of the art, but when you compare with Japan and European and the U.S., you have the also positioning, the way they see the art. Will the total nature of art? So you curated in overseas, also in Japan, Koide-san. I myself, I'm a researcher. So sometimes there are proactive artwork. That's how they are regarded, not only in the category of artwork of the people with disabilities. Maybe do you feel any differences in the society between those three regions? I mean, the difference in responses. You said in Japan there are some conservative responses in Japan you received, and you have the different impression in the United States and Europe. Well, I don't know whether I can answer that wisely. I encountered this art in Chicago in the United States. It was in 1990. At that time, it was at a time of Cold War has just over, and the U.S. art scenes were like they don't have to strengthen or they emphasize about America as number one at that time. And then self-taught artists and outsider artists, they are not regarded as elite in art, and those artwork are becoming discovered. But in Japan, that didn't happen in Japan. At a time of craft work, there are momentum to find a minor work. However, after that, there was no such movement or momentum. Sorry, I couldn't answer that question well. Well, Tom-san and Hosaka-san, you talked about a critical evaluation. Well, there are some comments. I'd like to ask Ouchi-san. In your presentation, you said about how about the people who appraise or evaluate our work? It is important for them to make changes on their side. Like Tom-san mentioned, we don't have one single easy answer. However, we have to expand the diversity of appraisers or the evaluators. But anything to add in terms of difficulties, anything you feel you need to do? Can you expand on this topic? Well, as I said earlier in my self-introduction presentation, as an art specialist, when the people who are involved in the mainstream art, I feel an atmosphere like purity or the autonomous of the art. They have a strong belief in that, but and sometimes they express it as an exclusive expression in a day-to-day basis. Oh, this is not art, they will say. This is about care. This isn't about art. So they try to express as a dichotomy, well, in their context, because they have a strong belief in art. However, just the word, the simple expression will hurt the artists with disabilities and also the people who are concerned about disability art, because it sounds like the words of exclusiveness. Well, it's based upon the educational background or historical or cultural background and the way we curate. Well, we have no concept of exclusiveness. We know we have to brush up together as a front line. I cherish that I have to include anything. Well, it's not a good answer. So let me ask Hosaka for the forefront of the art. You work in a museum and you started to collect the artwork of those artists with disabilities. And I asked all of you, including Tom-san, but first, Hosaka-san, as for the collection acquisition, do you have some kind of criteria? When you establish a criteria for collection, well, it will generate some inclusiveness and exclusiveness to some extent. But do you have some certain of criteria when you buy and acquire the collection of work? Well, it's a very difficult questions, and if you say no criteria, well, you may get angry. Well, whether it's a field of art brut or others, there is no clearly stated criteria. Well, it may cause some misunderstanding. If you have a certain clear criteria, when we have that some of the work does not apply to that criteria, you cannot include in your collection. Well, finally, there are something that you like to leave and keep and hand it to the next generations, but we have a limited resources and a limited space. So what we should do? So there are something, there are a trend that, well, the third-party evaluation is important. So select the work that is recognized by the third party. But in case of art brut, sorry, please allow me to use this term, or disability art, there aren't much space for the exhibitions. So they are also displayed in the welfare field and not in the art galleries. So there is a question of whether they are recognized by the art specialists or not. So it's a very difficult issue. So we started with the art collection from 2020. How about 2011 in Paris? We have the Biennale of Paris and also Venice Biennale to have the exhibition of the art brut. It's the epoch-making exhibitions. First, we work on the artists that are in the Biennale for collection. And then from 2016, we have 2.5 million yen in the budget. So it's very difficult to lay the foundation. But last year, luckily, we are receiving the collection from the Japan Foundation. So in 2011, We already have the artwork collection by the renowned artists with disabilities already. So now we talked about proactive artwork. Now we're ready to include the artwork that we like to select. But for the criteria, if we disclose the criteria, that will be hurdle for us. So let me get back to the theme as contemporary, how we appreciate the art of those with disabilities. Well, exhibition at the art museums or when the artworks are entered into the collection of art museums, this is not everything. However, as the museum serves as a gatekeeper to show and introduce the art of those with disabilities. And I'd like to ask you, Tom-san, in the first session, you talk about exhibition in art museums. And then here in Japan, still outside art work or disability art work are not collected well or not exhibited well in Japan. That's how I see it. But in the United States, can you tell us the situation in the United States from the context of the art museums? Can you tell us more about the U.S. situations?
I have a few comments about what we've been talking about. First, in terms of critical understanding of the work, I think it's our job to demand a critical attention. I think that we can't sit around and wait for the mainstream art world or the critical press to come to us and start to look at the work. That if we talk about diversity and advancement, we need to require that the critical press, critical journalists, the art world responds to our art as contemporary and on its own terms. I think we learn that from all kinds of social change movements where you don't sit around and wait, you have to take action to be equal. So I think part of that is our responsibility. In terms of kind of collection theory and curatorial ideas, Creative Growth is not a collecting institution. We're not a museum. We're an art studio, so we make a lot of work. What I learned from working with the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art curators, as we were looking at the work to acquire for the museum, as I mentioned, we looked at bodies of work by artists who were working in the same studio, at the same table, in the same place for 20 and 30 years. So we really looked for complex, evolving artistic practice that was meaningful. And I think when you get to the point of asking for critical attention, you have to have work that supports that request. So I think part of the issue with disability art is a lot of it is fairly young because the field is new. And I think that we also have to look at the artists that are more long established and to allow those careers to develop and to advance the work into contemporary as those artists are ready for that. So I think those are important points. This is not in response to your question, but another thing that's very important to me is to understand, for me, one of the issues around art brut versus disability is that art brut artists include many artists who don't have disabilities. And I think disability culture is a very important and often exciting part of an artist's work. So I think the artist that I showed you in terms of Monica Valentine being blind and how she responds to color, Dan Miller not using language, and his work is based in language. I think that William Scott being schizophrenic and his work is visionary. We cannot separate disability from the work because the disability is a part of it and the disability gives it its impact and its interest. The problem, I think, with critical understanding of the work is people don't know how to talk about that. It's a very complicated issue. We don't know how to talk about disability. We don't know what the right words are. We don't know if we should pretend it doesn't exist. So, there is no path forward for us that's been described, because every day is a new day for advancing this work. I think we need to have our own first understanding of what we're trying to do in the relationship, in the power of disability within the work, so that we can present that clearly.
Thank you very much. Myself, I am a researcher, and also I'm sometimes write critics. So from my point of view, in Japan, like you said, so artwork that is created by the disabled people. So how to describe them? What kind of a terminology, wordings that we should use? So that's nobody knows for sure, and I think that's very important responsibility for us to push forward with that. And also the criteria. Going back to the situation of Japanese art museums and things like standard or criteria for collection. We have very small number of art museum who collects this kind of work. So going forward, what do you think is the most important for us to advance this movement? What's your view on that, Koide-san? Well, the artwork by the artist with the disabilities, we must have more time to deeply appreciate them. Because oftentimes we are so busy, curators are so busy, so we, oftentimes we are not able to deeply appreciate the artwork. So, because disabled people themselves are not able to explain their work. Therefore, we are the one who deeply understand and deeply interpret. Like Tom himself, if there is such great, interpreter or someone who deeply understands, that's very helpful and fortunate. So we must nurture this kind of interpreter. May I? Because this is Kyoto. I think some of you are engaged in CAPS. So they are have subsidies from the culture of culture agency of Japan. So, like you said, we are too busy. We don't have any time to make research, and they don't even know how to do it. Maybe it seems to be impolite to be interested in such field. Therefore, hubs are trying to have an event where curators themselves to hold this event. So that's the reason why I did it. And another person are also designated to hold this kind of event. So in Kyoto government is trying to increase the number of people who appreciate and who deeply understand such movement. Maybe we should have a closed session or meetings where we are able to exchange opinions. What's the bottleneck? What's the problem of us hampering advancing these movements? However, this kind of events need to be increased. Iwate and Okinawa and Hyogo prefectures, they do have this kind of art museum which displays the artworks that is created by the people with the disabilities. But going forward, we need to increase the number of museums who are happily involved in this. So any opinion on that? Any input? So this is something overlapping the former question. So curation or the new form of evaluation or critics is something I would like to talk about. So we should not leave this issue on the hand of art themselves. In Japan, welfare. In welfare art world, they are trying to deeply think about the art. More people are, having collaboration. For example, joint program, not art, but welfare and medical people also need to be involved to promote this kind of activities, including the advancement of evaluators or critics. So this kind of initiatives, cross-sectoral or cross-industrial. Is there any concrete initiatives taken in Japan? If you know it, please share with us.
Probably personally, well, there are many cases individually. At my gallery, the Tokyo Shibuya Koen Gallery, we like to take that approach, alternative approach, and a more realistic. That will be one of the way to advance in reality. As a moderator, I'd like to ask you one thing. That might be a big topic, but I try to ask you more specific questions. I would like to ask you, because of time constraint, I'd like to ask you 2 questions, and then after that, we'd like to entertain questions from the floor. The first question's from me. So I'm involved in the wording, or the words and concept can sometimes release people or set the people free, and also vice versa. When we say the word outsider art, disability art, or art brute, well, we cannot define clearly some of the concepts. Those concepts are overlaid. So when there's a difficulty to categorize in this wording, but on the other hand, by having those terms, we can highlight the work. In the Thompson's presentation slides, I remember clearly shedding light on the overlooked artist. That was the expression used. So you can just highlight those who are not visible. But on the other hand, there are some difficulties in categorizing and the definition. Sorry, I will leave it up to you. Can you, anyone who can answer, or anyone who can like to make that point on this point?
Actually, my question is the category itself. I think inventing the category of, for instance, or name or concept of outsider art or artist art by the people with disability or impairment would help us to look at some kind of overlooked or marginalized artists. But at the same time, on the other hand, it might kind of make our kind of recognition in a way narrow, or something like other categories. So, what do you think about that kind of, how can I say, double edge of the sword or something like that?
Sure. So for me, that speaks to a larger and more complicated and important question of understanding who we see as the artists of our time and who can be an artist. There are all kinds of marginalized artists right now with disabilities within the Art Brut catalog, art students, people working privately, people working digitally, conceptually in ways that we don't value their work or understand it. So I think that for me, what is so compelling about the artists at Creative Growth that I work with is that the encounter that I have with their work is very immediate and very powerful as a human expression. And I think there are a lot of artists working in this way who don't have labels, who don't fit into categories, who don't get critical acclaim, who are outside of the, what is the art world? The art world is the museums, the galleries, and the collectors that support essentially an economic strategy to advance artists. And who are the artists that are left out of that cycle? I think some very important and interesting artists. So that's a larger question than disability art. That's a question for the art world in terms of how do we look with fresh eyes in terms of human creativity. And I think for some reason, and I don't know if it's economic, that we are much more limited in terms of what we accept in terms of visual art than what we accept in terms of music or dance or folk art or performance or other kinds of things. I think in other art forms, we sort of celebrate difference. In the art world, I think we want an established art history. And I think a lot of it comes down to money, I think, and value.
Well, thank you very much for your input. It is in a broader aspect in art world, as you said, Tom-san. Before the symposium, I was thinking about the contemporary art. So, in terms of inclusive, in order to think about include those art with the disabilities, something like something that is very certain. But in Tom's presentation, well, the artwork itself makes changes. The contemporary art may not be changed. It's not something to contemporary art will appraise, evaluate the artwork with disabilities artists, but it's like the art of those with disabilities will shake this current contemporary art world. Sorry, that was a very rough session, but do you have anything to add? Well, you asked about the example in the United States. Related to that, when you say category, what is the category for? It's a difficult question to answer. Well, it's something innate in the artwork or not? Well, something that is attached to the artwork. Why is that we have the category? Because we need a category for our researches. So as we need to have a style like the Netherlands 17th centuries paintings, or we have an Italian style of paintings at that time. So in order to deep dive into that theme, you will need to have a category. So we talk about the criteria for collection. We cannot cover all the art, so we will create the categories so that we can our museums will focus on this particular category or add that. So when we have the art history, the concept art built was born in 1945, and we have the concept folk well before. So there is a history in the United States that the outside art is evaluated in the expanded contest of folk art. But in Japan, we see the spring of the artwork of those with disabilities back in 1980s. So it's like you have the local artists and the world artist. Well, now we have a new art work on artwork with disabilities. Well, they cannot accept that because they have only the category of the local artists and the world arts and Japan arts. They don't know how to accept and how to put that art brut into their collection. Therefore, and we have a very different collection. So we do. It was easy for our museum to establish the special section to treat the art work. There was a responses, sharp responses, reaction at that time. But what is important is the category exists for the classification that is necessary for the museums or the curators. So this is not something innate in the art. So what is something that exists innately in art? Researchers have to change and appraisers have to change, and we have to look for something innate in the artwork itself.
Thank you very much. You have also talked about the structural, challenges in which we have no idea how to describe, how to treat all these arts works. And as Koide-san mentioned, interpreter or advocate need to be more nurtured. Like Tom, he is a great interpreter. And this is a question to Koide-san. And this is a very broad question, but when it comes to interpreter or someone who can be an advocate, how should we increase the number of people as such? How can we nurture all these people here in Japan? Is there any good idea? Of course, we don't have, direct answer. If we have a direct answer, then we should have, had it already. But is there any input from yourself? How can we nurture great interpreter? Very difficult question. And I'm afraid of making pessimistic answer to your question, but in today's Japan, it is very difficult to do this. Disabled people, those who have disability, have more opportunity to be involved in art, and good artworks are increasing. However, how we can create a bridge into the art. To this end, we must see lots of expertise, knowledge. And out of this tremendous number of knowledge, this great art can be incorporated into this, category or this kind of, basket. So this kind of person, I have never seen such a great interpreter. I'm sorry, I cannot answer to this question very well. So if that's the case, I am in the art history, study group, but it is very difficult, right, for people who even study to increase the number of expertise. So I think that education is the very important. Ochi-san, what's your view on that? Well, like she mentioned, the question we were just posed. Well, this is actually I am involved in at the moment. So people who would like to participate in this initiatives, I would like to increase the number of people who are willing to join us. So, for example, the interest around our brute is increasing for sure. That's positive. That's what I directly feel from day-to-day work. But I'm not sure, what people who are researching or studying art history, I'm not sure what kind of view they have. So the students of art history, they are coming to visit our gallery. So for sure, the interest over the arts and also over the minority, I'm sure the interests are increasing in younger generation today. But to connect or to bridge such interests into the art world is very important task we need to do. Okay, thank you. Hosaka-san, do you have any
Talking
input?
about how we can cultivate the person like you. I mean, those who can be a supporter of disability art. So, what do you think?
I think it comes from having a deep relationship and understanding of the artists. And I think that if you look at artists who are working outside of academic traditions, the relationship with the artist is very important to understand their practice, because we need new words to explain what they're doing. And I think that not a lot of us have the opportunity to have those relationships with artists. I think researchers, you might. Museum curators don't. Museum directors certainly do not. I mean, who has the opportunity to have these deep understanding of an artist's work? And I think we don't have the words to understand what they're doing. So I think we have to really experience their creative lives to start to come to some understanding of the meaning of their work and to describe their practice. I'm also thinking this is slightly in a different idea, but as we're talking, I've been thinking about a recent trip to Australia and how the Australians are trying to reconcile the long tradition of Aboriginal work in Australia with contemporary art. And the new Art Gallery of New South Wales in Sydney has moved all of the Aboriginal work from the basement into the top floor and prioritizes it in a different way and has moved the non-Aboriginal work down. So they're trying to bring the work to a different kind of audience and to a different kind of critical attention. But still, it sits with the other contemporary work as different. And I think they're trying to understand how they can exist together. And I think I want to watch how that develops, because I think we can learn from that. How does disability work? How is it different and related to other contemporary work? What are the critical and art historical aspects that are similar and different? And again, not easy answers.
Thank you very much. We have only 10 minutes left. So Hosaka-san, could you give us your thoughts on that? Well, Albert and artwork by disabilities. we must say, hey, you are not at all cool to understand such work. So that kind of stance we need to have. Hans-Louis Brucht and they respect the artists of Hans, so that the top creator all know it. So that's very important. In 2021, Pompidou's 900 artworks of Art Brut were collected, and there is a permanent exhibition and a Grand Prix. There is a big, huge exhibit of Art Brut next year, and Philadelphia MoMA and SF MoMA, started to collect a creative growth. So all these leading, museums are started to do this kind of activity, and it is not at all okay for a Japanese creator to understand this kind of movement. So that kind of stance we need to have. So it's not at all cool to not able to understand. It's so off the mainstream. So thank you very much. Q&A from the floor. First session, Tom's presentation. We, of course, welcome a question from the floor, and other questions also we would like to hear. Anyone from the floor? Thank you, Tom. I have a question. The artist, how much they are paid, get paid? So that's a simple question. Is this question to Tom? Yes, that's question to Tom.
Well, when the artist sells work, they get half of the money of the work. So they get paid depending on the price of the work. We have artwork that sells for $10, and we have artwork that sells for $100,000. So that's a very big difference in salary. And then the artists, when we pay all the artists that don't sell work, we pay them just a small amount, like $100, when we pay the artists.
I wanted to ask the artist who supports such artists with the disabilities. This kind of artist who.
I thought you meant the creative growth artists. You mean the creative growth staff artists? Yeah. How are they paid? They're paid. What do you want? An annual salary? $40,000 a year, $50,000 a year, and we give them health insurance and benefits and retirement. For the San Francisco Bay Area, we are in Silicon Valley, so our staff makes a lot less money than the people who work for, Apple and Salesforce and Uber and all the companies where their friends work, but that's what we pay them.
Thank you very much. I have another question. I'm interested in one thing. In today's materials that's maybe hosted by the Osaka Prefecture, we have materials of the World Expo, and also some materials about Tokyo. Here in Kyoto Prefecture, from the November 29th to the early December, we have the art festival here in Kyoto. And also Kyoto City Museum, we have an exhibition. Please come and see us. That's all. Do you have any other questions? I have a question for Tom. I was learned about the art in San Francisco. In San Francisco Creative Explorer, I visited that Creative Explorer, and I bought artwork from there. You are now based in Oakland. I'd like to ask you about the management. Do you have any other centers? Do you have any collaboration with other organizations to support the artists with disabilities, or your work alone, not collaborate with other organizations?
Yes, thank you for that question. Creative Growth started 3 other centers in the San Francisco Bay Area. So Creative Growth started Creativity Explored in San Francisco, and 2 other programs in the Bay Area. We're separate organizations, but we're founded by the same people. So we are related. And we have I have weekly meetings with their directors, and we have a collaboration. 5 years ago, I started a national conference for about 25 centers in primarily North America who have art and disability programs based on the Creative Growth model. So we come together annually to discuss all of these issues around advancement, studio practice, staffing, exhibitions, and that's a vibrant community. It's very important now that we have a national network to advocate for any changes that might come up politically around disability. So our artists have a voice. And this year we usually have folks from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and sometimes England that come to that as well. But you're invited. Next year we'll be in Philadelphia. We moved the conference around to make it easier for people to come from different areas.
I understand. Thank you.
One last question, hopefully. Sorry, 2 questions then. 3 people, if we have the time. Okay, thank you very much. In Tom's presentation, biography of the artist, you said, answering or to be able to respond to the questions in relation to the artists is very important. I'm impressed about that. So when it comes to telling a story of an artist, what kind of tip did you use or are you using on a day-to-day basis? So how well are you able to... This is a question to everyone. How are you able to tell story in a best way? Do you have any tips in terms of the exhibition or form of exhibition? Well, I mentioned about Yamashiro-san. I try to use as much as visual as possible because if you use word, your bias is included. Of course, visual images also has some kind of bias. However, visual is very important, useful, powerful tool. Well, for me, as much as possible, beautifully exhibit is the most important for me. Well, for me, as Hosaka-san mentioned, so artist, is shown in the image or video clips. So that I have a very positive feedback when we do that from the audiences. So it's very important for us as well to tell story about the artists. Of course, we are, very aware about the, to show it beautifully is very important in an aesthetically appealing way.
To Tom-san mainly, and those who have any comments on that, but hearing you participating at Basel and Art Fairs, like other collectors who see interest or collect the artworks from you, are they usually overlap with other more traditional collectors who might buy mainstream artworks, or are they a different group of people? Are there a lot of overlap, or I'd like to ask you that.
Excellent question. increasingly, the biggest collectors we have are people that collect contemporary art from different genres. So in Miami next week, I expect to meet, collectors from New York and Miami and Los Angeles and Chicago who buy expensive contemporary work and who also buy creative growth work. That did not used to be the case. 25 years ago, one of the first art fairs we did in New York is called the Outsider Art Fair. And most of the collectors that came to that were art brut collectors exclusively. So this speaks to that the field is changing. And with those changes come a broader audience of collectors. And it also moves the artist's work more into the contemporary price point. So the prices tend to be higher for a younger living artist.
As just Tom said, 20 years back, I started to sell the artwork. However, at that time, it was just for the limited audience. Before the pandemic, the situation has been changing. It's regarded as a part of the contemporary art. The contemporary artists started to have an interest in this field.
You also mentioned about the artwork that should be handed over to the next generation. This is the responsibility of the art museum. And in overseas, there is an example of a house, and the artworks that is held by Pompid. So, is there how many people who I think several people has the same amount of the Pompidou's work. So I think this is a kind of a trigger point in Japan to have this kind of. Well, I think that's if transportation fee is paid. I think that's possible. So cows like Ukai-san and Martin Names were shown also, and that's a tremendous, great artwork. It's what's important is that individual collection. So World Art Museum are not courageous enough to create from scratch. So Philadelphia has a Bonovitz collection, Milwaukee have a Pedro's collections, and now Bitwork and Manchester Musquake's collection. So someone has been collecting as an individual, and now today is art museum's role to exhibit such collection of a individual. But Japan, we are very weak in terms of the market, art market. So how we can create such a relationship with the collector is something we need to think about. That's a very important point.
Yes, I have something to add. I think it's also important to note that New York has a very strong, New York and London, Paris, they have very strong art markets for contemporary. So when a lot of people are spending a lot of money on art, it's easier to reach new collectors. If no one is buying art, you get stuck advancing the work. Second point on the museums and the collectors is one of the objectives of our partnership with San Francisco Museum Modern Art is to create a home for private collections. So part of what we're working on now is asking for collectors of creative growth work, particularly important pieces, to leave their work to the museum as part of the collection. So we're really working with collectors to contribute their work to the museum directly, so together we can build a collection. And it's been interesting because, of course, I know the collections you're talking about, and talking with collectors over the years, some of them didn't know what to do with the work. Where does this go when I die? Who wants it? There weren't a lot of museums that would accept it. For a museum to accept the work, they have to make a commitment to eternity to care for it and store it and preserve it and understand it. And there aren't that many places that want to do that. So this is a new opportunity to understand and store the work historically.
Because, well, there is no single answer. We have the issues, and it was very fruitful to discuss in that matter. We liked a lot of things we'd like to discuss, but we'd like to wrap up. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please give them a big applause, a big round of applause to them, to the speakers. Yamamoto-san, Koide-san, Tom-san, Hosaka-san, Koide-san, thank you very much for taking the time to come to us all the way inside and outside the world. There is no one single answer to all the questions we have. Well, Thompson mentioned taking actions and a challenging day-to-day basis, something we need to do day-to-days. Well, there are some keywords found in today's presentation, so we like to challenge. I like to challenge on a day-to-day basis. I like to, well, we were able to have the symposium happen in this university, and I would like to express my gratitude to Associate Professor Sawako Tanizawa of the Faculty of Fine Arts, Kyoto City University of Arts. And also, I'd like to thank about all the participants who gathered here today, and thank you very much for the fruitful discussions, and thank you very much for your cooperation and contribution. After that, we'd like to take photos. So I'd like you to have a, please wait for a moment. Well, thank you very much for your interpretation. Thank you. Well, the next Art to Live exhibition will be held at Spiral at Minami Aoyama, Tokyo, from January 23rd to 27th in 2025. So we're giving out copies of the latest flyers. And also, we do have the event scheduled for the July 26th to 28th. And lastly, finally, we're conducting a survey of participants regarding today's symposium, Art to Live. In order to increase interest in this field, we'd like to hear the opinions of as many people as possible. So please read the QR code and cooperate by answering the survey. So upon your return, please return the interpreter's devices at the reception desk. Thank you very much for coming today. Thank you.